All right, let's get started. Welcome back, everyone, to our first official lecture. We'll be going over the basics of HTML today. But before that happens, a few announcements. So office hours start this week if you weren't already aware. If you haven't already, be sure to create your portal account by tonight and join the class on Piazza. These slides will be posted on the portal and as well as all the other homework assignments. The first of which will be due next week and posted tonight. So be sure that you have your portal account set up. If you haven't already, be sure to enroll in the course on Cal Central as well using the permission code that was sent to you last week. If you have any questions anytime throughout the lecture, feel free to unmute or drop them in the Zoom chat and one of the TAs can help answer them. And two final things, be sure to download a text editor as well as Google Chrome, which I'm sure most of you have already. If you're DSP and you need any accommodations, please open up either a private thread on Piazza or email us directly at ask@wdd.io and we'll take care of it. All right, there we go. All right, let's get started. So there are a couple creative tools that you'll be getting
Nick,
to know.
your screen's frozen. You're still on the first slide. Yeah. Okay, there we go. Yeah.
All right. So there's a few creative tools that we'll be using throughout this class. They're really categorized into three main categories. First of which is the web browser, second is the code editor, and the third is prototyping. Today we'll be working with two of them, which are Chrome, the web browser, and VS Code, which is the code editor. Here's an overview of what we'll be going over today. We'll be talking about the structure of websites, the structure of a single page, the structure of the content, and then finally HTML tags and file paths. So first off, what is a website? Well, a website is traditionally a set of web pages that are served on a single domain, with each page written in HTML. For the purposes of this class, that's all we'll need to understand. But in some other cases, you can have HTML rendered through JavaScript or a number of other frameworks. A domain is the address that you visit. So for example, wdd.io, that represents where the files are located. How exactly does this work? So if we go on Google Maps and we look up a fire station, we could potentially be linked to this location on 2680 Shattuck. Now, this word fire station is basically the same as the domain as wdd.io, where the domain wdd.io points at an address, just like the word fire station points at the fire station address. Now, this is what actually gets sent back to you when you hit the address, and this is basically a small snippet of the HTML file. And then what you actually see is the rendered code, which looks something like this. Roughly speaking, there's really two ends of a website. For this class, we'll be focusing mainly on the front end, which is what you can see, like text, images, backgrounds, things like that. And there's another side that you don't see, which is the back end, which includes things like databases or other like functionality that is not visible on the front end. In terms of front-end websites, there's three main things that they're made of. The first of which is HTML, which basically provides the structure of the website, including the headings, the body text, the input fields, images, videos, and anything similar to that. Now, just using HTML alone doesn't look too great, which is why we also have CSS, which helps us add layouts to the page and make it look nice. Finally, the last thing we also use is JavaScript, which really gives functionality to the page, things like interactions between buttons, changing the actual screen when you say, click on something or anything of the sort. Sorry, is there a question? No? Okay. Yeah, so HTML is the structure of the page. It stands for Hypertext Markup Language. And yeah, it includes things like text, links, and images. This is an example of what HTML would look like. We'll get into what this actually says throughout the course of the semester. And CSS provides the design, and this is basically what a CSS style sheet looks like. Again, we'll get to work with them throughout the semester as well. And JavaScript gives you the functions, and it looks something like this as well. Now this is what like the folder really looks like. And inside you can see four different things technically. So we have our HTML files, which give us all the structure, the styles in CSS, in the style.css, as well as 2 JavaScript files, and then some images as well. Again, I know a lot of stuff, but we'll get into how exactly all this works very soon. Now, the structure of a website. Let's talk about some HTML. So basically, an HTML file is any text file that ends with the .html file extension. For example, index.html, which I'm sure you've probably seen at least a few times on the web in like domains. But that is basically the homepage of any website, and it really defaults, or any domain server, any server will default there if you just go to the domain. We edit this with text editors like VS Code, Sublime, or Atom, and we can open the HTML file in a text or in a browser such as Google Chrome to see the result, the rendered result. And really, what an HTML file is just a collection of tags that are rendered or that are organized in a parent-child relationship, similar to how these nesting dolls are set up. Now, what exactly are tags? Well, there's a lot of them, first off, and really they all follow this similar format where we have an opening tag. Let me actually point to this thing. All right, so we have an opening tag, which looks like this, as well as a closing tag with the backslash right here. And everything in between the tags is the content that actually goes there. They are the building blocks of HTML. And again, they typically look like this. Now let's dissect an HTML document from the ground up. So we have this rendered image on the side, on the right side, which is what you see as a result of this HTML text on the left-hand side. So this first line, doc type HTML, tells the browser that this file contains HTML, and it'll read the rest of the file as such. Now we first see our opening and closing tags here, the HTML tags, which everything on your web page goes inside. There's 2 main sections to this HTML tag, which is the head and the body. The head section contains all the information for the browser that you don't actually see on your end. So things like metadata for search engine optimization, or in this case, the title, which shows up on like the tab button when you take a look at Google Chrome. Inside of the body, you see everything else. You see everything that shows up on the web page itself. So for example, we have the welcome to WDD right here, as well as an image. We'll talk about these tags in a few slides. Now, okay, I guess right now. So this P tag is basically a paragraph tag where we enter in text, in this case, welcome to WDD, and it renders like that. We also have the image tag, which we do talk about in a couple slides, but it's a little different from the other slides in that this one actually has a self-closing tag rather than an opening and closing pair. And last but not least, we have the comments, which basically look like this. You just prefix it with the arrow and then apostrophe, or not apostrophe, exclamation and 2 dashes, and then end it with 2 dashes and the right caret. Everything in between those 2 tags are not displayed on the browser, but it's helpful to document your code to make sure that you know what each portion does. Before we go forward, any questions? Feel free to unmute or drop it in the chat.
So you said that the comments that come in the brackets with the exclamation mark and those 2 dashes and ending with dashes, they do not come on the web page. Why is that?
That's just the nature of the comment itself. Anything you put between these types of, well, this arrow and apostrophe, why do I keep saying apostrophe, exclamation mark, it's just there for you to document. So like, for example, if I had a section that's, I don't know, like a navigation bar, I could add a comment that says navigation bar. So if I needed to come back later to edit it, I wouldn't need to like look through the whole code, and I could just go straight to that comment.
So it's just for your own self.
Yeah, it's for your own reference.
Okay.
Are these just on localhost like by default? Like how can you access, like how can you see how a page looks like on your local machine?
Yeah, so if you just open up any index dot or any HTML file in almost any web browser nowadays, it will render it automatically for you. You don't need to like start a server or anything like that.
I see, thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, so now let's move on to the basic HTML tags and get a little bit more in depth into what exactly they are. So there's a couple basic forms that you'll be working with, not only in this class, but typically all the time, which are paragraph tags, headings, links, lists, and images. We'll start off by talking about the paragraph tag, which, as you saw earlier, is just a p tag with text inside. In this case, we have two different p tags, which means that each paragraph tag by default, or each paragraph by default, is put on separate lines. We can change that with CSS, which we'll talk about next week. But for now, just remember that anytime you have like two separate p tags or lines of paragraph tags, they'll be placed on separate lines. We also have bold and italic text, which oddly enough are not labeled bold or italic. So we have the strong, which basically is what our bold would be. And it looks like this, surprisingly enough, bold. And then we also have italic, which, EM, italic, just remember that. And it looks just like that. Officially means emphasize, but I mean, who calls it that? And just like the paragraph tag, the text inside the tag is what actually shows up. We can also nest tags. So if we nest the emphasized or italics tag inside the bold ones, well, then we get something that looks like this, where we have the different, both bolded and italicized, because it's nested within both tags. And then the text is only bolded because it's not inside of the italics. We also have headings, which is basically larger text. You can fit in some other accessibility things in here, and it's important for that, but we'll get into that probably in like the design section. So headings go from H1 through H6. We have H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, and H6, each of which get progressively smaller by default. Again, we can modify that, but by default, they look like that. I think all of these are, larger than the paragraph by default. And really you just use them for, I guess, emphasis and also accessibility, which we won't get into right now. We also have link tags, which are a little different. In this case, you still see the same opening and closing tag, and then you see this text right here in between the two tags. Basically, this text is what shows up on your screen. So when you see a link, you see a button or a link in line. We'll have like a click here text, which you can click on. And where does that actually send you? Well, it sends you to whatever link you put in here in the href. And yeah, that's basically how it works. If you wanted to link to an external page, like say you're on, I don't know, google.com and you wanted to link to Yahoo, that's an external page that's not in your own, in this folder, same folder as your website. So you'd have to use an HTTPS or HTTP right before it. We'll talk about file structure in a little bit, but just a taste of what that'll look like. We also have lists, which are, well, bulleted lists. So in this case, we do have a nested structure here with the UL being the unordered list, and the individual list items being having the LI tags for, well, list item. Inside of each list item, we can put the text, which is, again, what shows up. And in this case, we have an unordered list block with 3 list items inside, which just shows up like that. Now, images are an exception in that because there is no closing tag, no separate closing tag. Instead, what we see is just this slash and right caret here corresponding to this one left caret. Basically, how an image tag works is that you'll basically write this section, and then for the source, you'll write the file path for a specific image. We'll talk about this a little bit more in a bit. But basically, if the image is within the same folder as the HTML file that this line is written in, then you can just use a relative reference. And otherwise, if it's something that's on a different website, then we would have to use the HTTPS or HTTP in order for that to work. Any questions? I know that was a lot. Can
So
you
where do
make an image? Sorry, go ahead.
No, please go ahead. I asked already.
Okay, yeah, I'm just reading through this. Can you make an image into a clickable link? Yeah, as long as you as long as you nest the image tag within the link tag, you can definitely do that.
Would the order matter? So like if you nest like the reference in the image source, or like the image source in the reference, like change the functioning?
Are you referring to like the order of,
Like the
say,
nesting, yeah. Like how you can nest these different, like the images and the hypertext references within each other. And like if you bold them, is there like a limit to the nesting?
yeah, so the nesting order does matter. So for example, if we had, where is it? If we had, you can see the order here. I think it's a good example. The only reason why the different text is italicized is because we have the italicized tags right here. If we were to put, oh, what just happened? If we were to put these two EM tags, say, I don't know, like outside of the strong tags, then everything here would be both italicized and bolded. In this case, because both of these are just like styling text, it doesn't, we can interchange them if it went around like the entire thing. But there are some cases, like for example, if you wanted to nest an image inside of a link tag, you can't do it the other way around.
I see. Thank you.
Yep. Anything else? Awesome. So let's do a little quick check for comprehension here. Oh, I kind of answered this one already. But yeah, go ahead and put in the chat what you think the result is if we had these two nested tags. Awesome. Yeah, it looks like everyone's got it. Clickable image, image that leads to a link. Good job. And yeah, so let's see. Yeah, so one other thing, a lot of these tags seem very specific, and a question we often get is, what about like a generic tag? Just to help structure the content a little better. Well, what can we spot here? Let's take a look. Go ahead and throw in the chat what types of tags you can see, and let's see if anyone can spot the more generic type. Awesome. Yeah. So there's a number of tags here: HTML, head, body, h1, div, p. Yeah, all of those tags. And the new one that we see here is the div tag, which is more of a generic tag that really is just used for structure. And it doesn't do anything. If we just had an empty div tag, you wouldn't see anything, which actually I guess is true of all tags. But in this case, it's like an empty box that really doesn't take up any space. You'll see why that's true next week in the CSS lecture, because there are some elements that have like by default have spacing or padding or margin with it, but you don't need to worry about that right now. Again, yeah, basically just divides content up. So for example, if we had two different sections here, first one being a fruit section telling us what fruit we had, and the second being coffee and what coffee we have, then we can use two different, well, technically 4 different div tags in pairs to section these areas off. So in summary, some tags like EM, which is italics, or H1 come with some visual formatting. That comes with your browser, and it could vary between different browsers. And we'll introduce CSS to teach how to actually modify that yourself to make sure that your website looks the same across all browsers. HTML, again, to emphasize, is not for visual formatting, but rather it's just the skeleton, and it helps give you meaningful chunks to move around.
Okay.
Again, that's also why the div is so important. But for now, even though it's really just an invisible box, but
Real
down the
quick,
line,
Nick.
it'll really help.
Nick,
Yeah.
you have a question in the chat if you could explain the generic tag again, because they are kind of confused.
Yeah. So basically the div is like a generic tag that really doesn't add any styles or do anything to it. So if we just had if we had two different sections here for organization's sake, with a fruit section and a coffee section, we could use div tags to separate the fruit from the coffee section. I know it seems really abstract right now, but when we get to more more complex layouts, it'll start to make sense. And you'll start to see like why it's actually helpful in the context of CSS.
So by generic, you mean that by function, like their function is generic or they look generic? And what, because they don't have any special function as such, does it mean that?
Yeah, generic as in that just putting a div around something is not going to change its appearance
Okay, yeah.
by default. Like you can change that later.
Like the text or the size, like the font, that won't be changed, obviously. So
Yeah,
it's just
exactly.
generic. Okay.
Awesome. And yeah, one last thing before we head to design. One of the most common issues that we see on homework is issues with the file path. So basically, again, on the image tag, you'll need to use a file path that links to your specific image, or else our web server has no idea where to find the image. You have, be sure to actually have an image that's relative rather than having it point at something like this, because we're looking at it on our server, and in this case, this is looking on your laptop, which we really don't have access to when we're grading. So instead of doing that, if we had a file structure like this, for example, with a homework folder, inside we have our index.html, which is where we put all our HTML tags, such as the image tag. Their folder with the two images inside. In order to go from our index.html to this dog, what we have to write is this relative file path, which basically says, okay, we're inside the homework folder. Now we go to the images folder and grab the dog.jpg, which is this file. Now that will correctly link the dog.jpg file, but you have to be sure that it's actually correct and not an absolute path linking from your computer. Our server is also case sensitive, so be sure that dog.jpg in lowercase does not turn into something, say, in uppercase or it has like a space in it. So make sure everything looks like that. Awesome. Let's see here. I'm trying to figure out if we need to go over this right now because we are a little short on time.
You're chilling. Design is pretty short.
Okay, I guess we can go over these then. Okay. Yeah, so again, when you pull up a folder in VS Code, it looks something like this. So we have index.html as well as another otters subdirectory with more HTML files, which we'll ignore for now, as well as styles, which has our CSS in it, our scripts, which has JavaScript, and our images, which contains, well, the images. So relative paths basically point to another folder relative to the current file. So if we're in, say, the index file and we want to point to the otter.jpg that is inside of the images file, we can just go straight up like this, assets/images/otters.jpg, which gets us right in there. Alternatively, we can use an absolute file path, which basically says, look in the main folder. So in this case, it would be whatever this giant folder that everything is in. I don't think we have a name for it, but everything inside of that, the folder that contains everything in this gray rectangle area. And then again, assets, images, otter.jpg. That'll still work because our index file is inside the basically like the top level folder, and is in the same folder as the assets. We could also, this is another type of file path, which means go up one. But in this case, let's see. Yeah, in this case, it wouldn't work because this would go into another folder. And then that wouldn't be good because it doesn't exist outside. The absolute file path, we can just use a slash by itself, which in this case would also work because, oh wait, sorry. I think I said this was the absolute, my bad. This is the current, which is the same as the first bullet point. This is the absolute file path, which basically means go to the top of the folder and then look for assets and then images and like that. So in this case, we go all the way up top. And if we had, say, this line inside of otter-1.html, we see that this file is actually inside of otters. So this dash, this slash before the file path will actually send us all the way to the top, which will help us, which will allow us to access the otter.jpg. You also have some other variations such as external links, which may work. We recommend not doing that. And also you could, this will technically work on your computer, which is like a file path onto your computer, but it probably won't, yeah, will not work on the web server itself. Yeah, so this is just like better illustration of what I'm talking about. Feel free to look at it afterwards. But yeah, for the homework, it'll be out tonight at 7. It'll go over some of these like basic HTML tags and syntax. You can find it on the portal, so be sure to sign up. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop by office hours or Piazza. And office hours are listed on Piazza, so you'll have to get on Piazza regardless. But yeah, we'll save the VS Code demo for Thursday lab. And be sure to show up for Thursday lab because we will be going over a little workshop to teach you about VS Code and to get familiar with that for the homework. Any questions? Awesome. Let's take a, how much time? Let's take like a 5-minute break and then we'll come back for the design lecture with Julia.
So in this next portion, we're going to talk about design. So in the chat, you can ask questions throughout if you have any questions or just unmute yourself. So first of all, what is design? So design is not purely aesthetics. I feel like this is a really common misconception. Like I feel like before I knew what design was, I definitely thought it was just kind of like, oh, making things look pretty and stuff. But it's about a lot more than that, and aesthetics is just a small part of it. Ultimately, design is about problem solving. So here's kind of an overview of like a hierarchy of like a design process. So first of all, on the surface, you have visual design, which is what you see. And I think what most people kind of perceive design as. But kind of below that, there's strategy, which incorporates like user needs and business objectives, scope, which features like requirements, structure, which is like UX design, and skeleton, which is like UI design. And all of these together are kind of components of design. And ultimately, with design, you're trying to provide a solution to a problem or opportunity, keeping in mind like constraints, like the user's needs and stuff like that. So here are some terms that you might have heard of before. They're all kind of like interrelated, and some people use some of them like interchangeably, and they all kind of float within like the same realm, but there are like differences between each term. And for this class, we're mainly going to be focusing on user interface design, user experience design, and human-centered design. Yeah, so for web design, these three are kind of like the most important. So first of all is user interface design, which is also known as UI design. And it's kind of the space where interactions between humans and machines occur. So for the example of like a website, it would be kind of the user interface you'd be interacting with is like what you're like visually seeing on like your laptop or computer and stuff like that. And UI doesn't have to be digital. It can also be physical. Next is the user experience, which is known as UX design. And it's kind of a person's like emotions and attitudes about like either a product, a system, a service. So essentially it's like when a user is using, whether it's like a website, right? Or like an application, like how do they feel? Is it easy for them to use? Are they like, it's kind of like their emotions about their whole experience and how intuitive it is to use. And lastly, there's human-centered design, which, and it's an approach that incorporates the human perspective. So it's based off of what works best for like a human audience. So based off of like a human's intuition and habits, how to design like a solution that is best based off of that. And we'll cover this a bit more later. Yeah, so basically design is form meets function. It's both, it's not just, you know, visually what you see. The visual part is maybe the part that you interact with the most, but underneath that, there is a lot of other research and processes going on to kind of make it all come together. Yeah, so a concern might be if any of you guys are worried that, oh, like maybe I'm not good at design, or I don't have an eye for it, or I don't know how to do this. Don't worry about that. We'll throughout like the course, we'll go through like a bunch of different concepts and design concepts, I guess, just to like help you better design, I guess, yeah. So the next thing we're gonna talk about is fidelity. So when you write like an essay or a paper, you start out with maybe like an outline, and then you do like a rough draft, and then you might do several other drafts before you kind of get to like your final paper that you like submit. So fidelity is kind of the same concept as that. So when you start off working on a project or whatever you're working on, you don't jump straight to like the final solution or whatever the final like product is. You kind of work through iterations to improve and kind of like test out different factors and make sure everything works how you want it to. So to start off, you have a low/mid fidelity prototype. So this is kind of like the rough draft. So you really just are laying down, for example, in like a web page, right? You're really laying down the features that you want. It'll mainly be like colorless and or like black and white. And then you'll just have like boxes to represent like images, and then text might not even like, you don't even have to write out what it says. It might just say like, hey, this is like a title and this is like a paragraph type of thing. And you're really just blocking down everything you want featured on it and kind of visually playing around with the layout. And then these are also known as wireframes. And then moving forward from that, to a high fidelity prototype is when you kind of inject like a bit more personality or like add in kind of what you would be seeing for like your final product. So you would add in like color and like add in all these other design features, such as maybe like hierarchy and like building the font and things like that to kind of imitate what your like final product would look like. And this obviously looks a lot more like polished and finished than like your low and mid fidelity prototypes. And then lastly, there's also interactive prototypes. So for like web design, when you're looking at a website, it's not just static and like not moving, you're interacting with it. There's like buttons you're pressing, you're scrolling, things might pop up. So to imitate that for your like prototypes, you would want to like link things together and kind of make it imitate what the user would experience. So if they like tap a certain thing and a certain thing pops up, you would kind of want to imitate that. Yeah, so putting it all together. So from like the wireframe to the mockup to what we learned about from Nick about like the HTML and stuff. So here we have a card from like a website. I think this is from like a Airbnb experience. So it consists of like an image, a title, and then let me see. Okay, never mind. And then like a little rating paragraph. So if you can see the wireframe, you can see that it's like you just block out these sections using these boxes. So this would be like the image, the title, and then this is that review part. So knowing what we learned from the programming portion. This whole thing would be in your div, right? Because it's like a section. And that's like your container for everything within the section. And then you would have your image div. So this is where your image would be. And then you would have the price and title div. So that's this little box here. And then you would have your div tag with the rating. So that's just to kind of help give you guys an idea of like how this would be structured and how like you would be able to translate your designs into code. And then Nick went over this a bit before. So these are some of the tools we'd be using. So for design, we'll mainly be focusing on prototyping tools. For this class specifically, we'll be using Figma, but Adobe XD and Sketch and Illustrator are some other tools that you can use. And Figma is essentially like a collaborative, it's kind of like Google Docs, but like for design. So you get to make prototypes of like your web designs, so you can kind of design things out before you code them. Yeah, so encouragement interlude. So I know this might be super overwhelming, especially if you like haven't had any experience in design, but just like try not to worry about it. We'll definitely go more into depth and explain like specific things to you throughout the course. So there's no need to really like stress out about that right now. And then also, if you're interested in design in any aspect, feel free to like come to my office hours if you're interested in not just like web design, but also just learning a bit more about design or like a career in design or anything like that. Feel free to pop in. And then, yeah, so for, as we move on through the semester, so right now, week 1, we just covered like fundamentals to kind of give you like a high level, like overall understanding of design. Week 2 to 6 is going to be focused mainly on visual design and UI. And then week 7, 11 will be exploration. So maybe, so we'll look at like the ethics and impacts of like certain designs. Does anyone have any questions?
So are we going to be making like those low fidelity, high fidelity designs in this class?
Yeah, so I think in homework 1, actually, you'll be asked to make like a low fidelity prototype or mockup. And so throughout the course, like when you work on other assignments, like you get to make, when you make like your own website for your final project, we'll want to see like your mockups first.
What's the difference between a prototype and a mockup?
So I would say the prototype is more of like the interactive like prototype. So you have a lot more interaction. And then the mockup would be more of flat lay. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Is that it, Julia?
Yeah, that's it for design.
Okay. Yeah, so that's just the end of lectures. Some weeks will end early. So yeah, thank you guys for coming out, and hope to see you guys on Thursday because we'll be teaching a lot of stuff. So see y'all in lab. And if you have any other questions you don't want to say in chat, just stay in the call and we can answer your questions.